All right, so we have Veronica here. We are so excited to talk about Lucey Stone. And honestly, I'm just going to kind of let you go here. So please, who was Lucey Stone?
Lucey Stone was a famous advocate for women's rights, as well as an abolitionist for the end of slavery. She traveled the United States lecturing to huge crowds from 1847 to 1857 until her health started to fail, so about 10 years.
All right, so why did Lucey become an advocate for these causes?
Lucey's activism can be traced to her childhood experiences. She was born in 1818 to a farm family in Massachusetts. As a young child, she observed that her beloved brother was treated as superior to her, even though she could run faster, work harder, and endure more punishment. So who can't identify with that, huh? She promised herself she would never accept being treated as less than a man. At the time Lucey was growing up, women were literally the property of their husbands. They took his name. They had no right to their earnings, no right to own property, no right to inherit, no right to their children, no legal contract rights, and no right to vote. If their husbands beat them, as long as he didn't beat them to death, everybody looked the other way. I'm afraid that it's not totally gone away. The only education a woman was considered to need was enough to read the Bible and do housekeeping bookwork. By all accounts, Lucey had a happy childhood. The injustices she saw and experienced touched her deeply, though. And also at the same time, the United States was deeply divided on the issue of slavery, you know, if more slave states should be admitted to the Union or not. And the speakers she had at her church, you know, pounded on that issue. They spoke of the evils of slavery and the efforts to eradicate it, and that also concerned Lucey.
So you kind of talked about how most women didn't have education, but where was Lucey educated?
Wanting more of a life than was currently offered to her by staying on the farm, Lucey determined to get an education. She became a teacher at the age of 16. She wanted to further her education, but her father, although pleased that her brothers go to college and he was willing to pay for her brother's education, thought her education had gone far enough. He would not pay for additional schooling. So Lucey used her earnings from teaching to pay for her college education. And she went to Oberlin, and she was the first woman in Massachusetts to get a college degree. Oberlin was also on the route to the Underground Railroad, helping slaves escape to freedom, and that became her cause too. Now, Maggie, do you know anything about the colleges? Is Oberlin still, is it a women's college?
That I don't know. I don't know.
I know
much
it's a
about
private
that.
college, but I don't know much about it.
Women were going there when I was.
Did you go
Okay.
to Oberlin?
I didn't go to Oberlin, but I went to Callis.
So it's
And knew
not,
people that went there.
it's both men and women can go there?
Yeah.
Okay, also, public speaking was not accepted for women at the time. It was practically unheard of and considered a rebuke of biblical teachings. However, that is what Lucey was determined to do as her career. And she gave her first speech in public in 1847. So now I don't know if anybody saw that movie, News of the World with Tom Hanks. So that's what they did. It's an excellent movie, by the way. Do you like Tom Hanks? They went around and they lectured, and that's what they did, and that's what she wanted to do.
So can you earn a living lecturing?
Well, it was a career in the 1800s, but only men. There was no TV or radio, no cell phones. So people were desperate for any kind of news. So if there was going to be somebody in town, they gathered to hear her speak. Various organizations would hire you. People would talk on politics, morality, and a fee would be charged at the door. And that referring to the movie again. So what Tom Hanks' character did, he went around to other little towns and he read the newspaper. because a lot of the immigrants couldn't read and they wanted to know what was going on in the world, World War I. They wanted to know what was going on in their countries. And so he would read them the newspaper. So Lucey, along with other courageous women, broke that taboo because she said, I'm going out there and I'm talking and let's see you do something about it.
So where was her first public speech?
So her first speech was at her brother Bowman's church in Massachusetts. She gave a lecture on women's rights. Both her parents attended, but her father was not convinced at the time that his daughter was doing the right thing. By the end of her speech, Lucey had converted him. According to her daughter Alice, quote, the first time Lucey spoke, her father sat in the audience with his elbow on his knee, his chin in the hand, holding his head down in shame, like that. But when he heard how well she spoke, his feelings changed. In after years, he said to her, you were right and I was wrong. Alice described her mother's great appeal to audiences. She had great power as a speaker. A little simple country girl, she had no tricks of oratory, but she spoke with a fervor of conviction, a complete forgetfulness of self, and an extraordinary natural eloquence that swayed great audiences as wind sways a filled brain. So some people are natural speakers. Some people have the charisma to engage with the audience and some people don't. So apparently she had a lot of natural ability.
So when did she start speaking for the Anti-Slavery Society?
In 1848, the Anti-Slavery Society hired her to lecture on a regular basis. This was a dangerous job, especially for women, because opponents of the movement would often physically attack the speakers. Lucey often talked about women's rights while lecturing about anti-slavery, and the Anti-Slavery Society, who was paying her, felt she was diluting the message. They asked her to stick to the subject she was hired for. She responded that she had been a woman before she had been an abolitionist, and she would not lecture anymore for them, but would work wholly for women's rights. The Anti-Slavery Society were reluctant to lose their most popular speaker and decided that Lucey could lecture for them on Saturday and Sunday, and the rest of the week she could lecture for herself on women's rights. So I'm not sure, I couldn't find anything if they paid her for talking about women's rights, but the Anti-Slavery Society paid her on the weekends. Lucey married Henry Blackwell in 1885, and practicing what she preached, she kept her own name. She famously said, my name is my identity and must not be lost. So that's a very common thing. Maggie, you probably keep your name when you're married.
I probably will. Who
My
knows?
daughters both have graduate degrees. They both have their own names. So I would have done it. I never thought of it. My mother-in-law wasn't that fond of me anyway, so I would have been a step too far. But yeah, so I know I have a sister-in-law that's Chinese. I mean, they don't dream of taking their husband's name. You know, they have 3, 4, 5 names, but they keep their name in it. It helps them identify the family. So, but that was really forward thinking of Lucey. Her name was her identity and she was keeping it.
Yeah, so we've learned a lot about Lucey, and she was mostly in Massachusetts. So why is Lucey Stone important to Viroqua?
Well, Lucey Stone's important to Viroqua because she came here. In 1856, her and her husband came to Vernon County in a horse and buggy to survey a piece of land that he owned and he wanted to sell. While here, Lucey was asked to give a 4th of July speech at the courthouse. So someone in town knew of her reputation and asked her to speak. So first they were going to have her speak at the courthouse. So the original courthouse in Viroqua was where Felix's was. And now it's Utopia, but that's where the courthouse was, the first courthouse. And they decided there was such an interest in her speech. They went over to Mr. and Mrs. Groves. He was the editor of the local newspaper, and he had a great big yard, a beautiful grove of hickory trees. Plus, the early settlers would gather here on Saturday and Sunday to hear the latest news. and they would picnic. So already they knew of this spot. She delivered a speech about women's rights and an anti-slavery speech to over 2,000 people. So I mean, isn't that amazing? 2,000 people. In a letter to Colonel Munson, W.E. Mitchell, formerly from Viroqua, wrote in 1919, "In my mind's eye, I can yet see the beautiful little lady in white as she stood there on a platform speaking to the people for the rights of women." An account of this speech was written about in the Western Times, the newspaper at the time. On account of the great crowd in attendance, her lecture was delivered in the Grove. She is an excellent speaker. So she was speaking and the platform collapsed. And she jumped up and said, that's what's going to happen to our civilization if we don't outlaw slavery. So she was quick on her feet.
Wow, they definitely rolled with the punches
Yeah,
there. So Lucy got her own monument.
yes, so on Rock Street, there's it's called Pioneer Cemetery, and she has a big monument. And it was because of Dr. Charles Porter. He was a prominent member of the Viroqua community. And on July 4th, 1930, they had a monument placed at the location where she gave her speech. It holds the graves of many of the first settlers in Viroqua. And the monument says in part, "Here, July 4th, 1856, Lucey Stone, Morning Star of the women's rights movement, delivered the first women's right address and anti-slavery speech ever given by a woman in the great Northwest."
Wow. So you mentioned Morning Star. Why was Lucy called this?
This was a title the women's movement gave her, and I think it's an acknowledgement of how important a speaker she was for their cause. The Morning Star most commonly refers to the planet Venus, which appears in the east before sunrise. I'm sure you've all seen that great star before sunrise. It's bright, lovely, and all by itself, shining like a beacon, which is how they thought Lucey Stone was a beacon. She has become a popular celebrity in Vernon County. On July 4th, 1996, the Historic Society sponsored a reenactment of her historic speech on the lawn of the Sherry Butt House. Some of you might have seen that. And in 2006, Lucey Stone was featured in the Society's cemetery walk. And I'm sure Lucey Stone also figures in a few of the high school history reports that young people write.
So did Lucy live to see any of her most ardent beliefs come to fruition?
Lucy passed away, excuse me, in October 1893, long before women finally were granted the legal right to vote. So that was the 19th Amendment, which passed in 1990, a lot of effort by a lot of people. So women were finally able to vote in 1919. And many of the other rights came about because they were only historical, that women couldn't appear in public, that women couldn't talk in public, that women didn't need to go to school. Parents started to realize it was just as important for their daughters as their sons to get an education. In March 1972, Congress passed the Equal Rights Amendment, which provides for legal equality of the sexes and prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. So, Becky, would you say that that passed, or would you say it didn't pass? It hasn't.
Yeah.
So we're still awaiting ramification by the required 3/4 of the state. So we're not there yet. My goodness. We should get on the ball and get that passed.
That would be nice.
So slavery ended on December 18th, 1865, when the 13th Amendment was adopted as part of the United States Constitution. Neither of these issues would have been settled if not for incredibly brave, forward-thinking women like Lucey Stone, who made it their lives' work to make things fairer for women and people of color. In her own words, "Now all we need is to continue to speak the truth fearlessly and we shall add to our number those who will turn the scale to the side of equal and full justice of all things. And as Lucey Stone was on her deathbed, she said to her daughter, which has become kind of her motto, make the world better.
It's lovely.
And we have a picture of Lucey Stone here. And she always wore a really simple outfit when she taught, and she often dressed in white, a white collar at any rate. And if anybody's interested, this is the book her daughter wrote. You know, it's an old-fashioned book, but it's quite interesting. There's a big section in here about Viroqua and the trouble they had finding the land, and the grass was knee-high, and the horses didn't like going through it. That's quite an interesting book. And here we have when they reenacted her at the Sherry Butt House in 1996. This is a poster they had up. So
Wonderful. That kind of shows a little bit of our history here in Viroqua, but then, of course, her daughter's information about her too.
yeah. So
Wonderful.
her daughter wrote her biography. So any questions?
So what is this book about that the daughter wrote?
Pardon me, Amy, what?
What is the book about that the daughter wrote?
Oh, okay, so the book's about her early life,
It's
growing up.
Lucey Stone or the daughter?
Pardon?
Lucy's or the daughter's?
Oh, Lucy's. So she was her only daughter, and she wrote about, that's how come I know, for instance, that her childhood was happy, because nobody disputes that. It's just that she took the issue so to heart, but I mean, no, nobody abused her or anything like that. She grew up on a farm, had a good relationship with her mom and dad and her brothers and her sisters, but she just wanted so much more out of life than was offered. So it's an interesting book.
That one's here at the library.
When you said 2,000 people came to this speech, what was the population of Viroqua at that time?
I was
Roughly,
thinking
Oh,
about
let's
that
see.
too.
I'd have to
it's
Google
about
have to
that.
2,000
Google.
right now. isn't it?
Yeah, I'd have to Google that.
Viroqua is closer to what, 5?
Okay, but I'm just wondering in 1856. what it
Yeah.
would have been.
I bet you it wasn't much more than that.
Yeah.
Town with about 30 houses.
Wow.
So people
So-
came from surrounding areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there were 2,000.
And one correction, the monument is now at the Pioneer Cemetery. Originally, it was in the boulevard across the street in front of a home.
Oh, okay.
And they had it moved over to the cemetery, so it would be in this.
Because the people
I
there.
thought that because I like Google Maps it of where it would be, and I swear it had showed it was in front of a house. I was like,
It
wow, that's a
was.
weird spot.
It was.
But then when I drove by, it was in the cemetery. So I was like,
There was
oh,
like, you know, a cement block with the writing, Lucy, you know, spoke here and the date. and everything. So, but then it got moved to Pioneer.
When did they do that? Do you know?
I don't know.
I want to say in the 80s, maybe.
No, it had to be later because it happened after. We
I
came right.
I came in the 90s, so.
Yeah, I came in the
Yeah,
nineties
there's,
too.
there's documentation at the historical museum about the paperwork they had to do.
And do we know why they moved it there?
I think just because it was, they did the bigger monument then.
Oh,
Before it was just like a square, a rectangle, only about so high.
So in the 30s, it was a smaller monument.
Just a small.
And then they made it bigger.
more.
I
so
see.
that, the one that they have now is one Dr. Porter actually made. And I believe it probably was out somewhere with the Black Hawk Trail. And then they would have brought that.
Oh,
interesting.
You know, our state recently has passed the women's rights amendment, so actually we do have the required amount, although everyone, there's big discussion about whether it's too late for them to do this. You know, you're talking about the equal rights amendment.
because
Yeah.
it's been too long.
Yeah, they haven't decided, but another state which would meet the, is it 3/4 or whatever?
Yeah.
Has passed it.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know what the.
So
state
it's
is.
still in the process, hasn't
Well,
quite finalized.
Some people are trying to decide whether this is legal. I'm
Yeah,
just telling you
exactly.
that's what's going on.
So, interesting. Does anybody else know some information? I know you're back there with a lot of information about Lucey Stone. Anything else you would like to share?
She was a founding member of the Temperance Union. She was
Temperance
invited
Union.
Oh, really?
to attend the temperance union, she and her husband. I recently saw a newspaper article where they were selling 3,000 acres of land, but he also bought for other people. He was like a land broker.
Hmm. What is a template? What is the template?
And
White was the color of the suffragettes. The suffragettes, when they marched, they always wore. white.
That's why she wore white all the
Oh,
time, yeah.
That makes sense. then. Yeah.
But was there a question about temperance?
Yeah, she answered.
Yeah.
Oh, did
you know?
anybody else hear that temperance union? Okay, yeah.
Do they know where the property was in Wisconsin?
Yeah, it says so in the book.
it's where, I believe it's over by the barn.
Okay.
It's where the Otter Creek and Kickapoo River join.
Oh.
But like I said, he bought up for other people, so, and that was only like, maybe 600 some acres, but in this, it's on the paper, it was 3,000, so. he must have bought up.
Was that on East or was that on here?
Here, around here. It was
That's
an
a lot of
ad in the-
land.
It was an ad in the Western Times.
Why did he buy land here? You wonder.
I think they
Yeah.
were speculators, they sold, they never came back here. After they left, they were only here for the summer.
Hmm.
I think they were land speculators, they saw a good deal and could sell it. Make money.
Yeah. If he was more of a land broker, that would make sense.
By all accounts, according to his daughter, he was very supportive of his wife and would go often with her when she spoke and,
Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
and that was unusual too at the time. you know,
Yeah.
He was so supportive of her.
What was his name? Do you know what her husband's name was?
Pardon me?
What
Husband's
was the
name?
name of Lucey Stone's husband?
Yeah.
It was
Blackwell.
Henry Blackwell, I think.
Yeah,
So he is the brother of the first woman doctor in this
Yes.
country? Is that?
yes, that's right, yeah.
Nice.
Blackwell's a pretty.
Yeah.
So you said the brother of the first woman doctor?
That's right.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's right,
Prominent people.
yeah.
Wonderful. I guess I can check in online. Was there any possible questions here? How much time did Lucy spend in Viroqua? This person says they thought they heard that she was here for 3 months.
So Denise, you said the
Just-
summer.
I think it was just the summer.
Just the summer. Okay. And then somebody else says there's another book that can't be checked out at the museum that contains letters sent between Lucy and her close friend Antoinette, who married Henry's brother. It's full of real juicy info. And then both Henry's sisters became physicians. So wonderful. Thank you for commenting. If you've got any more here online, please feel free to put it in the chat and I can read it off. All right.
I missed the juicy book.
Yeah, that's the juicy. Well, I'm sure there's honestly quite a bit of information out there about her. So you kind of got to pick and
Yeah,
choose,
yeah.
right? At least we've got one in the library.
Yeah.
Yay. Is it, say there a title on there? On
In the
the
book?
spine label? Yeah.
Lucey Stone by Blackwell.
Oh, okay.
When was it written?
Oh,
It's like an old one.
yeah, it's a very old fashioned book, but. 1930. By Alice Stone Blackwell.
And her mother had passed away quite a bit before that.
Her, Lucey Stone's mom
Her, Lucy
Oh.
Stone's mom or Lucy Stone?
passed away.
Yeah.
Before it was published.
Right.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah, sorry. That was a misworded question. All right, I'm not,
When did she die?
How old was she?
I think she was 78, you know,
In her 70s, 71 maybe.
I know, it says.
well,
in here.
born 1818.
And she
Died
died,
1893. Yeah, so yeah, 71.
so.
That's a pretty
yeah,
decent
What an
age.
interesting life she had. Makes you, wow, I want to go out there and.
Yeah. I think it's just so interesting. It's quite amazing that her platform fell apart. And yet she immediately just got up and then literally had a physical, I don't know, metaphor for for the suffragists and the
Yeah, but,
abolitionists.
To go out there and face off in hostile crowds, because the crowds didn't come to hear her speak as much to see what she was going to talk about. I mean, it's not like they came to hear her talk about equal rights. They came because they wanted to know what's going on. And,
Oh, yeah.
So often the crowds were hostile, but she had a real talent for winning over the crowds. And they said she talked real, common, and
Mhm.
she convinced them. They said sometimes she started out with a really hostile crowd, and they were all on her side when she quit talking. So.
All right. Well, if there's no further questions here on Zoom, I will stop the recording here.